Hey, I'm Romi.
And I'm Nicole. Welcome to the Her Pursuit Pod, where we share our journey of building our business, The Daily Drip, a dynamic media platform that provides content and community for more than 4,000 South Florida female CEOs, founders, business owners, executives, and professionals.
Whether it's through our newsletter, events, or this podcast, our hope is to inspire your next big move and arm you with the tools you need to crush it. So tune in on your drive to work, wind down with us after a long day as we share our journey and the journeys of other remarkable business leaders on Her Pursuit.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Her Pursuit. My name's Nicole. I'm co-founder of The Daily Drip, here with my partner in crime, Romi Wallach, and we are back again for another episode with Chad Tourin, founder of Connect Financial. And we are talking all things business, finances, personal finances, planning, strategy, mindset, all the things. We're picking up where we left off. If you missed the last episode, be sure to go and check it out to get all caught up. But Chad, I'm going to pick it up right where we left off.
Dive in. It's great to be back.
We're diving right in. We're happy you're here. But we had spent a lot of your last episode just talking about really the mindset around deciding to start your business.
Sure.
And what those first steps of taking the leap are like, what you should be thinking about, where you should be putting your focus. And you said something really important in the last episode that I really want to kickstart this episode off on. And that was that your business will become your biggest asset. Talk to us a little bit more about what that means and why it's so important for anybody who's thinking about starting a business or in the early stages,
Sure.
Why they need to adopt that mindset and philosophy.
Well, I guess the one caveat to give is that a business that's built and run correctly will become your biggest asset. If not, it may become your biggest debt.
It will be if they work with you.
Yes, correct. But assuming that you do start correctly from the beginning, which I think is one of the most important things, is not right away leaping towards thinking that you're further ahead in the business planning process than you are, it becomes your biggest asset for several reasons. One is that that's where most of your dollars are going to go. Right, it's very unlikely you're going to keep investing into the market if you are starting a business. Right. You're no longer going to be putting money into your company's 401k if you're starting a business. Right. And so not only is that where you're putting your money, right, but a business that's run well, you will get better rates of return on that business than you can ever get in the market, in any outside investments. I can't say forever, right? There are those, if you were one of those people that jumped on the meme coin phase during COVID, or the apes, and you got those things right, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, there are those one-off, but those aren't sustainable, right? So from a sustainable asset standpoint, you will get a better rate of return on your business, which over time will cause your value to grow. And, when people exit a business, it's not hard for it to exceed the value of someone's home or the value of their car or how much they have in savings, because it's going into the business. Now, with that being said, you want to still build assets outside of the business.
Right. You never want to be dependent.
Strategically to do so.
Right. Dependency is important to keep in mind. But that's an interesting point, because then as that asset builds, to your point, it affects everything else. It affects your whole net worth.
Yeah, and there's risks that need to be identified and addressed from the beginning as well, too. Right? Because now you are losing some of the security that comes with being an employee. Right? It's really easy to say, I'm covered if I get sick, I'm covered by my group benefits. If, I pass away, well, I had group insurance through my company, my family will be okay.
Right.
The company match that you get on a 401k and it's helping build your retirement. So there's risks that need to be identified. No bigger, if we're saying the business is the biggest asset, well, if you're a solopreneur gig kind of worker in this independent contractor land that we really are in now, because no one seems to want to be an employee working for the boss anymore.
That's true.
Right? You got to recognize that if you by yourself are starting out, it's not just the business that's the biggest asset, it's you are the biggest asset. You're the one driving the revenue. You're the one growing the income, right? And so recognizing yourself as an asset is also really, really important, and identifying that's the biggest risk you have.
Yeah, what if something happens to me and I can't work, I can't service the clients, then what?
Exactly. So, there's one hand your income, which is income protection type stuff that used to be done through work, right? Where, the technical term is disability insurance, but I don't even like referring to it that way because people think of a handicap sticker.
Right.
And the reality of it is some sort of illness that you don't know is going to come.
Right.
We were not going to share it with the audience because it's a little personal, but we were just talking about, something personal in my world that,
Right.
Income protection is important.
Right.
Right. And so there's that aspect, but then it's all of the costs of running your business, right? You might have rent, you might have utilities if you have an office space,
Right.
taxes, interest on loans you may have to take out to run the business. Everything from that to, as you grow, employee salaries, right? If you're out of work, but you're the one driving the revenue, those expenses don't stop. Right. So now not only do you have to worry about your own income, but you have to worry about the business folding, right? How are you going to keep the lights on?
Right.
And so there's planning that can be done to address all of those kind of fixed operating costs of a business that would allow you either time to come back, or if it's not feasible for that, you can find someone suitable to buy your business and not have to do like a fire sale just because the expenses haven't stopped.
Right. I remember when we first sat down to talk about you helping us with our services, with our planning and our business and all of that. And I remember you said something to me that really kind of kept me up that night, because we were talking about,
Hopefully not too.
No, but it was in a good way, but it was like, wow, because we were talking about Romi and my partnership, and and I remember I said to you, what happens if something happens to Romi, or what happens if something happens to me? And you said it's far more likely that one of you will get sick than something dramatic happening. And I remember thinking, I didn't even consider that. That wasn't even on the radar.
Having me get hit by a bus multiple times over the year.
First thing I said was, do you want to be in business with Josh?
Yeah.
Right? Because that's important if you're starting out, and if you do have a partner, recognizing that if any of these unknowns happen, right, now all of a sudden their spouse is inheriting the shares, their equity, they're stepping in. They might, most times not know anything about the business or how to do it, but they're still going to be entitled to money and compensation and distributions, and it can really, really cripple a business.
I think the key is people don't know what they don't know. I think there's so many things and variables, and you get so focused on just getting this thing up and running. And I think having all of this kind of information and talking with someone like you right from the very start, I think people put in their minds that once I have money, once the business is running, once I've established,
Do I have enough money to...
Right. And so what they're thinking is after all of these things happen, then I will start to think about, but
Yeah, and the reason why they think of that too is that, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. The reason why they think of that is they think most what they think of a financial advisor, what they're really thinking of is an asset manager, right? So, and there's a very big distinction. I utilize asset managers. I manage money. I utilize asset managers to help manage my clients' money if it's the right fit or thing like that, because there's no reason. I always come back to there's always an expert for something. So if it's not something I can handle directly, I'm going to find that person and kind of bring it all together. But when you look at it, there's so much more to planning than just growing money, right? It's like, okay, well, what if that money gets taxed at 50%? It doesn't matter what rate of return that asset manager got for you did if you're not looking at taxes. Or if your income stops, right? You could have the biggest portfolio in the world. If your income stops, you're going to deplete that thing really quickly. Or, are they having conversations if you have a special needs kid and the type of planning that needs to go involved in that? Because there's serious ways you can harm your special needs child if you don't plan correctly through different trusts and things like that. So it's really getting everything out in the open. And I'm sorry I kept you up at night, but it's asking those thought-provoking questions that don't need to be answered on the spot. Right. And it's think about this.
For those of you who listened to the last episode, Chad, Romi, and I, really Chad and Romi go way back. And Chad has been a supporter, a friend of the Daily Drip. He has sponsored, he's witnessed this every step of the way. And so when I came knocking on his door, will you help us? I totally came with that mentality, we can't afford you, or you're not going to want to work with us. I know you work with bigger businesses and all of that, but that was because I was thinking I didn't know what was involved. I really got a crash course in, no, this is the most important strategic advisor you could possibly have, because you're thinking about things that have to do with if this, then what.
I think the key is it's working with you is playing offense, not defense. And I think that was one of the biggest things. Even, my husband and I are both.
You actually play defense before you can play offense, right? Because you got the best offense in the world. If you don't have defense, someone's going to score on you all day long. They give a sports analogy.
Go into this business, you don't know when money's going to be coming in. But I even remember saying, like, my husband started this business before anything even comes in. Like, how do you take it out? How do you take money? How do you pay yourself? All of these things that nobody's thinking of because they're so focused on just the business. So I think having someone that can kind of help you set the foundation and start to anticipate what comes next and how to set everything up so that you're not putting out fires.
Well, the other reason too why people think, oh, I don't have enough is because in that asset management world where it's pure asset management, it's not profitable for them to work with people who don't have enough just because of the way the compensation structure is, right? Versus, someone who can either go and just in a planning capacity, which gets customized based on the individual. Like there's clients that want to meet once a year and their fee is significantly lower and someone wants to meet every week or every month or whatever it may be. Right. So there's a home for everyone, right? And that's why we've built out Connect to have also advisors at different levels and capacities where if someone wants to have that once a year and they don't need necessarily like this in-depth kind of planning, there's a home for that person.
But I love it. I've so enjoyed the whole experience start to finish because I've learned a lot. It's changed the way I think about my business and my personal finances. Like it's changing the conversations my husband and I are having. It's changing the conversations Romi and I are having. And it's like looking at everything through a whole new lens. And I love the way you said that, offense versus defense. There's asset management, but then there's also strategizing for everything else.
It's balanced too, because you also have to think not just today, but down the road.
So let's talk about that. That's a perfect segue. We've spent a lot of time in the last episode and even in this episode talking about starting, how to get started. Can you walk us through? You have this great pinwheel, which you guys are all going to see. I'm making Chad do.
I've never seen someone so excited by this diagram.
I'm like, I know about the pinwheel. She's like, no,
guys, I geek out on tools. I geek out on concepts and learning and like diagrams. I geek out. And I was so blown away in my meeting that I literally had to say to Chad, time. This is going to be one of the events we do for the Daily Drip community because they need to see this friggin' pinwheel. This thing is wild. And it was so powerful because it really, in one image, gave me a visual representation of what the next 20, 30 years could look like. And I think when you're starting, Romi's right. You're stuck in the weeds. You barely can see to tomorrow. Never mind.
Yeah, because in the beginning, it's just, okay, how am I going to get revenue?
Right. That's all you're thinking about.
If we go even further back, like, how am I going to like start? Like, what entity do I form?
Right.
Right? Like, how do I pay myself?
Can you give our audience who's listening like an auditory pinwheel moment? Like, help them?
The wheel doesn't actually spin, guys. It's really just imagining yourself in the middle or your business in the middle of this wheel, and the outer spokes of the wheel is really all of the things that should be part of something that's a holistic plan, right? And so it's even things that you may think of, my financial advisor's not going to care about what auto insurance I have, right?
Right.
And from a financial planning, it's like, it's not about a rate of return or stuff, but like a lot of theirs talking about risk management, right? Like so many people have the wrong deductibles on their auto insurance and they don't even know it because most auto insurance, they're just salespeople that say, hey, have a $500 deductible, right? Because they're making the most money on the $500 deductible, right? So really, as kind of coming back also, when you were talking about laying, in the last episode about laying everything out there or use the getting naked, phrase, it's also a thorough review of everything that you do have. Because there are, unfortunately, in my business and in other types of businesses, people that are pure salespeople. And they're not approaching something from a consultative or advisory approach. And so, we don't do it to pick apart and say, hey, this person did something bad, this person did something good, but to like let the client know. And I think it's a big part about what we do is educating the clients first on where they stand now, what risks are there and how do we get to where they want to go.
So what are those stages beyond startup? What's at least the very next stage so that somebody who's out there listening, who's maybe just taken the leap, just starting their firm, their consultancy, maybe they're in year 1, year 2, or maybe they're thinking about doing it. What does year 5, 6 look like? And what should they be thinking about in that stage?
Yeah, so we really can't group these stages by years, because some people could be stuck in one stage for 3 or 4 years. Some people can move it through it in 6 months. Right. One of my best friends who has a very successful business, when he years ago approached me saying, hey, can you just run some projections around when we're going to break even? And with the numbers he gave me, it was 3 years. Wow. Right? The business broke even in 3 months.
Wow.
So it's why I say it's not really necessarily a year thing. It's kind of how are you working through, or are there a lot more revenue coming through than you expected, or more demand?
So is break even a new stage?
Break even is at the point where you've really, if you're taking all your revenue minus all your expenses, is it positive or negative? Right? From an ongoing basis, but also if you had to invest capital into it, is there enough liquidity in the business that you at least have your capital there? If you invested $50,000, do you have $50,000 of cash in the business?
So then what are the stages?
So there's a startup stage, which, to break that down as simply as possible, it starts with it's having a plan. Not necessarily a financial plan, but a business plan. How are we going to get money? What are our forecasting on expenses? I don't know if everyone's familiar with SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Like, how do you compare to your competitors in the marketplace? And that's another big thing, right? Understanding what your competitors are doing, right? And the things they're doing good, things they're doing bad, right? Because they always say don't reinvent the wheel, but you also don't want to follow a bad wheel.
Right.
Not the wheel we're talking about, not the pinwheel. So it's making sure you have, from startup type stuff, I highly recommend. So you start with the business plan, right? And then once you kind of can see what expenses look like, in an ideal scenario, having 6 months of operating cash set aside in the business is kind of I don't want to say the recommended threshold, but it's like a good starting place, because you have enough of a buffer where you're not going to go into debt, where you're going to stay afloat. The other thing for the business owner to recognize in the startup phase, it's quite possible you're not taking money for yourself.
Correct.
Right? And tying back to we've had that conversation, right? Pay yourself first really applies, it should apply all the time, right? When you're an employee, it's easy. I mean, it's not easy. Most people don't do it, right? But if you do it, your money's going to be flowing in. But on the business side, it might be hard to pay yourself.
You got to pay vendors. You got to pay bill. Everybody has to get paid before you.
You're the last person to get paid.
It's motherhood, but it's in the business version. You're the last one to eat. You're the last one to get everything.
Your coffee is cold.
Can't stand cold coffee. So, having those expenses, forecasting out, identifying like the risks of what can happen. So knowing that you are the income generator for the business, so making sure your income is protected. And if there's other employees involved, if they're super, super important to the business, and if they left, something would happen to the business, right? Making sure that you have some way of either recuperating the lost revenue from what they were bringing in, or, enough way of recouping or having money to go out and hire the next person to recruit them to come in if they leave. Like there's strategies out there that can do that. There are strategies out there that can, quote unquote, tie them to the business. I don't want to use like golden handcuff, because it's kind of, people think like that just sounds bad, but there are ways where if someone is vital to your business, you could design strategies that are good for the business, good for that person, and entice them to stay.
And then, so what happens once you've got that all in place? Now your business is making money. You're finally getting paid. You're on payroll now. You're on payroll now, and now you got profits.
So that's another thing to think of, payroll, right? People don't think of this. Everything is really tied together. Like, who's doing your payroll? Right. Many times in the startups, you're just keeping a spreadsheet, or like, and it's important to make sure that you're tracking things correctly, because you lose deductions if you don't. Right. Potentially could, or can violate laws. Right? Like, I've met with people and they have 30 people as independent contractors, not one of them's an employee. And like, why? Well, they probably don't want to be, because when you're actually on payroll, the company is paying Social Security and Medicare, half of it for that person. So the employer may say, hey, I don't want to do that. Let them pay it on their own. But then you could have a whole other problem, right? Because you might be violating the legal side of what needs to be considered an employee.
Right.
And that's a tricky spot, I think, for a business. And I think that's where you become so invaluable, is helping the business owner identify when it's time to start bringing on these resources. Because it's scary, right? You're a business owner, finally you see some money coming in, and the last thing you want to start thinking about is, okay, now I'm going to take on new expenses, and what does that look like? But it's being able to see, I think, the long play. Like, you hit that inflection point where you can no longer sustainably manage your own books, or you should you shouldn't be.
I'm a CPA, and last year's the first year I actually hired someone to do all of my stuff for me. They're actually building my accounting system and doing my payroll and all that stuff. Can I do it? Sure. Right? But this actually ties to, no, but this ties to that next phase, right? That Nicole was just talking about. Once you're in that next phase, which we really call the growth phase, right? Really, it's now identifying, one, how valuable is your time and what you can generate for the business versus what it might cost to pay someone to do that thing that you used to do, right? Usually you see it in marketing, someone handling your social media, which I wish one day we can come back to that. Nicole used to handle my social media. Those kind of things, there comes a point where there's a trade-off between, okay, it's not worth it for me to do it anymore, right? Either it's from a profitability standpoint or it just drains you. Right, there's a great book that one of my clients recommended called The 6 Types of Working Genius. And it literally changed how kind of not only I operate, but also how the team operates. Right. So I definitely recommend that book.
Everybody in their zone of genius. The more time you can spend in your zone of genius, the better it is for you and the business in turn.
Yeah, then there's 6 types, and everyone has 2 that they're great at, 2 that they can do, but they just don't really enjoy. And then there's 2 that they despise. And it's not about the job function. It's about do you connect to it, right? So they gave this example of someone who's a phenomenal salesperson. They got promoted to sales manager, which is entirely different job what you're doing than actually doing sales. They were making more money, but they hated it, right? Because being a manager was not their working genius.
That's what leads to the burnout too. And I think you and I had this conversation early on when we were working with someone who, when we were figuring out our roles, part of it was Nicole was like, well, I'd like to get you to doing this, which was something she did. And he looked at her, he's like, she will die doing that because it's not in alignment with her. She needs to stay in her lane and you in yours.
The book actually, he says spouses use it together because it helps identify oh, no wonder why they didn't want to plan this trip, but yet they can execute the trip, right? Romi, Craig very well, right? Craig is that rah, he gets everyone energized, motivating. So his working genius was literally galvanizing and whatever, where it was a perfect complement to me, where I'm just constantly thinking of what's that next idea, having all these visions and stuff, and not having, because he's also, his other genius was telling me slow down, pump the brakes, so it's.
We'll do a whole episode on partnerships because that's already, that's a whole other.
But it's true. Finding your zone of genius and doubling down on it, and how you spend your time and how you dedicate yourself to it, and the learning you do to get better at it, the investments you make into it.
So coming back to the growth stage, it's really kind of starting to identify one, how much you should be paying yourself. Many times in the startup phase you're not. How do you pay yourself? What should you be outsourcing? Who should you be hiring internally now? Usually that's at the stage where you start having employees or contractors. We don't need to go back to that classification again, but having people work for you.
I love that. So startup dedicated to planning. Growth really sounds like what you're saying, if I had to put one word on it, optimizing. Optimizing you, optimizing the team, optimizing the revenue, just optimizing things.
That's also, too, where you start visualizing how you may, because some people don't want to ever exit. They call it a lifestyle business. They just want to be in it forever. But how do you plan on happening down the road? Because that growth phase is where you really should start doing that planning.
So what's stage 3?
Stage phase is mature. And there could be different names for these things, right? But mature is where your business is flowing, right? You've kind of went through that hockey stick and, example where it's it sucks in the beginning and all of a sudden it takes off, right? Right. And now you're at this stage where you're not getting maybe that 30 to 40% increase year over year because you've established yourself in that marketplace. Now, ideally, we'd love to continue getting that, but there reaches a point where you're earning really, really good income. The business is thriving, and you're kind of at this steady, right? And then we start having conversations where this typically starts in the growth phase too, about succession planning, continuation planning, right? How does the business stay afloat if something happens? Succession is who's going to take it over one day, and then start planning for that exit, right? So this is where you start having the legal side of stuff come in too. Typically in that growth/mature phase is drafting your buy-sell agreements, having your operating agreement reviewed and refined, because stuff usually changes over that period of time, right? Similar to an estate plan, which you should review every couple of years, you got to review kind of the operating agreement. Right. Maybe there were changes that happened where the original, provisions don't apply anymore.
I think being able to plan too for a variety of situations is critical. And what I always watch you do, like even let's say you've got those people who are like, this is a lifestyle business. It doesn't mean you shouldn't still be sort of preparing your business for some possible other opportunities or situations.
Well,
and so
most people don't know what they're doing tomorrow, right? Let alone 10 or 20 years from now. And so the important thing too is knowing what that person's time horizon is, right? If they say, hey, my time horizon is 1 year, they're getting entirely different advice on the personal and business side than someone, who has saying, hey, I want to maximize what I have at 65. I don't care what it looks like tomorrow. Right? And it's an entire different approach. We see that a lot in the insurance industry. If someone, there's so much bad press out there about whole life, but if it's a 2 or 3 year plan, it's the worst plan in the world for you. Like I would literally say, do not do it. But if you're saying, hey, I'm trying to maximize when I'm 65, it beats bonds. So it's like, it's just a matter of what the context, time horizon, and goals.
And I think that's what's critical about working with someone that takes the time to really understand what those goals look like and how different things are not, like, it's not one size fits all.
Shift, nothing is linear. Right? Like, we're in the sandwich generation, right? Like, how do you know if you're going to get stuck taking care of your parents? That could literally change your entire plans. Or you get, some illness. Like, you just never know. Or if you look at, for example, I give this a lot. And we're experiencing this now. There's going to be a whole bunch of changes to the tax code this year, very likely, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff that was supposed to go away that now probably won't with the new administration in, right? I say probably, we have no idea. But the point is you have no idea now. If you're 40, right, imagine how many administration changes there's going to be in your lifetime. And so do you want to gamble on which one's going to be in office when something happens? Right? Like, the historical tax rate, the highest bracket was like 60% for a 50-year period. Right. So everyone who may have all their money in, like, when they're older in CDs and all these things that are safe assets, that's ordinary income. If tax rates go to 60%, their retirement's done. But so it's like planning for all of these unknowns is really, for the business and personal side, really important.
And then bringing it all the way home to that fourth stage, which is exiting or preparing to exit, like maybe you're going to sell this business. It brings us kind of like right back to the beginning where it's understanding that your business is your biggest asset.
And what's it worth?
And knowing what are the factors that contribute to value in a business. And so Chad has this cool tool that we're going to bring to all you guys. It's not the pinwheel, it's another one. But he did it with me where it was basically like this questionnaire that we had to fill out a bunch of various. Yeah, it's super quick to give you a general pulse on what is the value of your business. But what I loved about the tool was not only did it spit back a number and a value, it let us know if our asset was strong or weak, and in the weak areas, what they were, so we could start working towards strengthening those areas and increasing the value.
Yeah, it shows your gap, actually, like where you are, where it could be just based on stuff today. And that's why it's important to do it every so often, because where you are today, like, you need to keep moving the change along, but it identifies like the factors that are driving the gap and the value. And so like which factors are most driving the value, and of that gap, what's hurting you the most, right? And so there's like 27 different factors that it goes through. Some are market based, what industry are you in, what geography, all these different things like that. And some are operational. Do you have your systems and stuff documented, your processes documented? Is there a succession plan, coming back to what we do in the prior stages, right? No one's going to want to buy your business if they don't see that. You as the key person, is there a protection on you so that if they acquire you, they know that your business won't go down the drain right away? Because most times they like to keep the prior owner on for a period of time.
A transition period, for sure.
It's just so much, and it was such a great activity.
But what you were talking about was the round table.
And I said, you know what, Chad, we need to do this as a round table event and invite our members and our community to come together to do this for their business and identify what their gaps are and start working towards closing them. But I think for everyone...
Actually cool. The tool allows you to do 16 businesses at the same time. And they do it in a round table. It's like a discussion thing, and so businesses start playing off of each other, and then have the conversations. Well, how did your sales and marketing go so well, or different things like that. It makes it fun.
So we've got a lot of fun things. With Connect being a community partner of ours, I'm trying to bring the experience of working with Chad to our community of business owners, solopreneurs, startups, so that you guys can get access to these tools and information and start thinking bigger about your business. I think the biggest thing I see in talking with you guys at our events or just in conversation, member meetups and things like that, is a lot of times when we're leaving Big Law or we're leaving corporate, we're so focused on revenue, building revenue. And a lot of times we think of it in terms of our income from our employer, just replacing our income. And we don't think in terms of, well, then what happens to us if something happens to us and the business goes away and we are the business? We don't think in terms of succession planning. We don't think in terms of, if I'm going to start my own firm or my own practice, I'm really embarking on a journey of creating my biggest asset. And think of that path and that journey in terms of that. Think bigger than replacing your income.
If you're replacing your income, right, that's just your income. Running a business has expenses, right? So you can be earning the same income that you were earning, but now you have all these expenses. I was doing my projections at the end of last year, and like, I kind of was like, holy crap, when I saw like what my operating expenses were going to be for this year. And honestly, it was like 10x of what I earned my first time I opened my business, the expenses themselves. Right. And like, just so getting an understanding of like, it's not just your gross number anymore. It's like, what's that bottom line number?
It's a lot to think about, but it's easy to do it when you have the right people in your corner, the right support system, the right resources, the right tools. But I hope that for anyone who listened to this episode, and if you didn't catch our last episode with Chad, be sure to go check that out and look out for all the upcoming events and programming, workshops, roundtable discussions. We have a lot on deck with Chad and his team at Connect to help bring these resources to you. I hope, and Romi hopes, that being exposed to this kind of conversation and these kind of tools helps you to think bigger. Think bigger than just solopreneurship. Think bigger than replacing your income, because you could be on a path of creating generational wealth if only you knew how, and if only you had the tools and the resources. So I'm going to wrap up this episode, and thank you, Chad, for joining us today. And
a lot of fun once again.
Looking forward to getting you in front of the community and having them be able to pick your brain the way I do. So we'll see you guys all back here on another episode of Her Pursuit. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Her Pursuit.
You can listen to new episodes every other Wednesday on Spotify or watch us on YouTube. Stay in the loop on all our virtual and in-person events, read our latest articles, and catch new episodes by subscribing to our free weekly newsletter.
Check out the episode notes for more details, and we'll see you here on our next episode of Her Pursuit.